Welcome to the podcast, Speaking to Influence, Communication Secrets of the C-Suite. I'm Dr. Laura Sicola, your host, founder of Vocal Impact Productions, and author of Speaking to Influence, Mastering Your Leadership Voice. My guest today is Mitzi Perdue. Now, Mitzi is a particularly interesting person because she has more perspectives all mixed in there than anybody I've ever spoken with, and I love the combination. Number one, Mitzi is the daughter of Ernest Henderson, the co-founder and president of the Sheraton hotel chain. She's also the wife of the late, great Frank Perdue of Perdue Farms. If you eat chicken, you have most likely had Perdue chicken at some point, and probably sitting in your fridge like I do right now. She was also the syndicated environmental columnist in 420 publications across the United States, and she's the author of 22 books, the most current of which is How to Be Up in Down Times with Mark Victor Hansen. And, as if that wasn't enough, she's also the founder of Win This Fight, an anti-human trafficking organization. Mitzi, thank you so much for all you do and for joining us here today.
What a complete joy to be here, and I loved your topic.
Thank you. Well, now, before we get into the meat and all the stories that you have to share, because unlike most of my guests where I just want to know what their trajectory was, I'm going to be asking you questions that I'm going to give you the freedom to reach into any of those bags that we just mentioned. If you want to talk from your perspective of running this anti-human trafficking organization, then you can do that. If you want to give lessons or examples that you remember learning from Frank or from Ernest or from whoever else, then that's completely up to you. So you have full liberty to pick any muse, anything that strikes you as a relevant source of wisdom today. Sound good?
Oh, love it. Thank you.
Okay, so my first question, before we get into the official rundown, I have to know, because you were raised in this world and you've lived in a world full of everybody from celebrities to business moguls, I'm sure politicians and leaders of all sorts of places. So this is kind of normal for you in a way that it's not old hat to most of us, to those of us mere mortals down here. So my question for you is, despite the fact that you were always surrounded by them, were you ever really just intimidated to meet anybody? Anyone stand up?
Yeah, actually, in my whole life, I think it happened once.
Okay.
And the reason I was intimidated was because I admired the person so much. And I have a friend who said, I think you and Mark Victor Hansen would really get along. Why don't I arrange a phone call for both of you? And I'm thinking, but he's the guy he has written more than 300 books. He's sold 500 million books. He's just, and then in the National Speakers Association, God, he's as high as they get.
Yes.
And so I'm thinking, I'm going to be in a phone call with this man. And since he is at the absolute summit of everything that professionally I admire, what will I have to say to him? So it's actually genuinely intimidated doesn't do it justice. But then he called, we talked, and he was the easiest person to talk with in the world.
And now you have a book together.
And we got to talking, and we talked and talked and talked, and he endorses the organization that I founded, Win This Fight, the anti-human trafficking effort, and he said it'd help. Oh my gosh. And then when COVID-19 struck, we were talking one day, and I was saying, I have 40 years as a science writer and as a health writer. I know a lot where we could give people advice, and you're one of the most inspirational people in the world. What if we wrote a book together? And 3 weeks later, and 18-hour days later, came this.
How to Be Up and Down Times. Okay, everybody, you've got your homework before you even start. You've got a homework assignment. And by the way, I have it. I'm about halfway through it. I've got it, the Kindle edition, and it's fabulous. It's really,
thank you. Thank
you.
I
love that it's a bunch of short little chapters, easy motivational pieces to think about, really great uplifting suggestions for people. All right, this is going to lead us into our official questions now. With all that you do, who do you need to influence now?
I think the people, that's going to come in two buckets. Professionally, I'm particularly interested in helping absolutely everybody who wants to be an entrepreneur and particularly women, but men as well, to rise in their career. And any shortcuts that I can share with them, I'm eager to do. That's one bucket. The other bucket is anybody who's interested in combating one of the worst scourges on this planet, which is human trafficking. Boy, if that touches your heart and you want to be connected with people who are doing something about it, contact me. But for the moment, let's stick with what my training is, because I've also written books on how to make your family business last, how to teach values to your kids so that they'll enjoy it, how to stay connected with your family. So I'd love to talk about those things.
Well, it's completely up to you. There's so much that we can talk about here. So with regard to any of those issues, in particular, perhaps with the Win This Fight, what's the biggest communication that you're facing? Let me try that again. What's the biggest communication challenge that you or the organization is facing today?
The challenge that we're facing is we had a wonderful fundraising thing, because Win This Fight is about fundraising. And the way we do it is we have the ability to help people convert very valuable items into cash by means of an auction, in which the Sotheby's has offered, because they care about human trafficking, they've offered a very, very attractive price structure, so that if you say you have $1 million necklace, and
I've got at least 3, I'm sure, yes, lying around somewhere.
Well, the one that I have in mind, it belonged to Marlene Dietrich, and it's appraised at $1 million. If it were auctioned through them, the amount of commission that they'd take would be reduced because it's a charity. So, and some of the donations that have come in, I mean, I think they're eye-popping. There's a man from Taiwan who has donated a 69-carat perfect ruby that belonged to a Chinese emperor from 300 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
Probably worth between $40 and $60 million.
So where's the what are we communicating? Where's the challenge?
Okay,
I would love to see it.
All right, here's the challenge. All the donations that have come in have fabulous stories behind them, the sort of thing that people want to know more. But during COVID-19, the timing's not good. Who wants to think of extreme luxury items? I mean, maybe it's an escape, but it's not really relevant when we're at the height of COVID-19. So my communications challenge is, or my response to it is, to put the project on hold. But the idea is people donate amazing things, which we'll have at a great giant auction at Sotheby's. But the communication challenge, I don't expect to get traction when people are, worried that their relatives might pass away, or they're worried about their finances, or is their business going to survive? So the timing isn't good. That's my big challenge. And the answer to it, I think, is, I hope this is the answer, timing.
Sure. And it sounds like a big challenge, or perhaps an angle for it is helping people remember that COVID-19 is not a deterrent to human trafficking. And
No, actually, according to what I've heard, human trafficking is actually increasing during these times. I mean, but what I can offer is fundraising. And if people aren't thinking about fundraising and aren't feeling flush, I don't want a $40 or $60 million amazing ruby that a man from Taiwan donated. I don't want it to go for $1 million. We need it to go for even more than it's appraised at.
Sure, to make the greatest impact. So we got to get people to focus on the impact that the donation, or that the bidding, that the auction will have, and not focus on the item itself. Got it. Then in order to, this could be from you or from Frank or from Ernest, or any direction you want to go, what's a specific communication skill that you or they had to learn in order to get to the top and be
I've got a dandy from my father.
Oh, love it.
All right. My father, when he was 26 years old, he got engaged to my mother. My mother came from Wheeling, Virginia to Cambridge, Massachusetts to meet her future in-laws. And my grandmother, that is my father's father, grandmother Berta, told mother, don't marry Ernest. He can never stick to anything. You're going to end up poor.
Oh my gosh.
Well, mother said, I don't care, I love him, and they got married anyway. But what a wake-up call for my father, that his own mother is telling his fiancée, don't marry him. So he took this very seriously. He went to a career guidance counselor to find out why he hadn't been able to stick with anything.
Mm.
The career guidance counselor told him, and I hope this is advice, or this story might be useful to some people. The career guidance counselor tested him for an entire day and all, just a battery of tests. And at the end, he said, "You've got the worst human relations skills I've ever come across in my entire career."
Oh.
The only career that I would really recommend for you is, you're clearly a bright fellow, but you should spend your life as a scientist in a laboratory where you don't have to interact with people. Well, Father took this as a challenge, and he reasoned correctly, I believe, that almost your entire success in life is going to depend on your ability to get along with people and communicate with them and figure out what makes them tick. And so for the rest of his life, he made it a project to overcome that sort of prediction that the career guidance counselor had given him. And he began studying like psychology books. He read How to Win Friends and Influence People. He told me he would read that book by Dale Carnegie every 10 years. He took the Dale Carnegie course. He took public speaking courses. He did everything that he could do to learn to communicate with people. And he became so good at it that he became, in the hotel business. I once estimated that he probably interacted with more people than almost anybody else in the United States except for a national politician. Wow. So he went from absolutely the worst to one of the best. But he did it by consciously overcoming his greatest weekness.
That's amazing. And I'm sure that was not exactly a flip a switch, take a course. Okay. Problem solved. That sounds like a lifelong journey to constantly be improving. I mean, it certainly is for me. So I would think that coming from that stage where he began, it would be even more challenging.
I personally know that it was lifelong. I mean, for one thing, he told me every 10 years, I read How to Win Friends and Influence People. But another thing, I noticed that we'd have weekend guests at our summer place, and over and over again, it would be famous psychologists. Like if you're in the field of psychology, you'd be impressed that B.F. Skinner was a weekend guest.
Sure.
Okay. Or there's a guy named Eddie Bernays who I think his background is psychology, and he's known as, some people call him the father of modern advertising. Oh. But again, that's somebody who understands a lot about what motivates people.
Right.
And, it really paid off, because if I can tell a quick story about how in the 1930s, which is when Sheraton began, that was a time a little bit like today. And I have a story that might be encouraging to people today who are encountering problems, making progress towards where they want to be.
Well, let's hear it.
Thank you. Okay, this is what he told me about what he'd do every time he took over a hotel. And by the end of his days, he owned, or the family owned, 400 hotels. He employed 20,000 people. He told me, in the Great Depression, the hotels that he'd get, there would always be ones that would be teetering on bankruptcy, sure. That nobody could make any money out of. And, people were running away from real estate, and particularly hotels, as fast as they could. And Father was a contrarian, but he had discovered a human relations skill that enabled him to make a success when nobody else was. Well, here's what he'd do. The day he took possession, he'd invite, say there are 400 employees at the hotel. He'd invite every one of them into the ballroom, and it's sort of, get to meet each other, except that he's on the stage and he's addressing them. And, he's looking out in the audience, and he knows that every single one of them is demoralized. They're afraid they're going to lose their jobs. With sure. 25% unemployment, the chance of getting another job, or how about zero? So he knows he's talking to a completely demoralized group of people. And he also knows, because he studied psychology and thought about all of this, that they're not going to listen to a word he says until he can take away the overwhelming pain point, which is fear that they're going to lose their jobs. So he told me the first words out of his mouth would be, I want every one of you to keep your job. And then he said, here's why. He said, because I know that you know your job better than anybody else in the world. And I want to give you the resources and the encouragement to show the world just how great you are. And you'll see in a few months, this is going to be the most popular, the best served, the most financially stable hotel in the whole city. And we're going to be a shining example to everybody else in the city that things can turn around and get better. And it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Father told me, and this is one of the psychological principles that I'm just eager to share. He said, people have a compulsion to live up to or down to your expectations.
Yes.
And he was communicating that he expected and believed in them, and it paid off.
Clearly, it's such a beautiful story too, and that's a really key point, that people will live up to or down to your expectations, and whether it's your children, your employees, your friends, that's so critical to really think about how you are communicating to them what you think of them, because they'll match that self-fulfilling prophecy. How interesting!
Yeah, and I'm not sure that he would have figured that out just without studying it, but for somebody who was spending so much time taking courses and reading books and magazines and interviewing people, he had a deeper understanding than any of his competition.
Yes.
And he told me that there was a part 2 to that story, which is the next day, the employees would see a whole, groups of like plumbers and electricians and decorators who would be coming into the hotel. But the super wonderful part from my point of view is, of this story anyway, is that all those people who were refurbishing the hotel, they would go straight for the places that the public would never see. They would be refurbishing the employee dining rooms, the lockers, the showers, the elevators. The first money that he ever spent was on the employees. And I asked him, why did you do that? Why wouldn't you put money into the places where you'd get your money back? And he said, because the success of any enterprise at every level depends on the employees. And this was a way of signaling to them how important they were to him.
Sure. Yes, take care of your employees and they will take care of you. I think that's very wise. Then what is the next big goal for you?
It's a tip that comes from Mark Victor Hansen.
Oh, wonderful.
And this book that I'm holding up here,
which is How to Be Up and Down Times. Right.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, just totally out of the blue, he commented, Mitzi, you know how to use Photoshop? And I said, yes, it's like a hobby of mine. I'm like a black belt in Photoshop. He said, could you write across the top of it, more than 1 million copies sold? And I said, but Mark, I don't want to be dishonest. And he said, it's okay. Nobody but you and I will ever see it. But what I want you to do is create this thing with more than 1 million copies sold, and then print it out, and I'll print it out. And we will visualize the success, put the picture of of How to Be Up and Down Times, put the image with the photoshopped more than 1 million copies sold, put that image in the kitchen, in your office, in your bedroom, in the bathroom, every room in the house, and then just visualize 1 million copies sold. And this was such a revelation to me that you could even think that way. And, I used to think 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 copies is just wonderful. But he's raised my sights.
I hadn't thought about that, just creating the book title, not that you were going to print it for sale, falsely saying.
No, I'm not into false advertising,
right,
but I'm very much into visualizing.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm going to do that with mine now. I'm going to go, when we're done today, I'm going to have to go and get my book and the Speaking to Influence book and Photoshop a little, more than 1 million copies sold. And I love that.
Yeah, and then just put it out everywhere and just
all around my house, right?
Yeah, I swear to you that it's changed my thinking.
That's great. And I think it's wonderful. So I will second that motion for sure. Well, Mitzi, this brings us to the Listener 24-Hour Influence Challenge. And this is your opportunity to speak directly to our listeners and give them one short instruction, one step that they can complete within the next 24 hours in order to have more influence. How would you like to challenge our listeners today?
Okay, I have a beautiful one, and it's quick.
Great.
And you can download it from Amazon, and it's inexpensive. Okay. But it's the book that guided my late father, and it guided my late husband. And that's the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. This book it's a classic and it's timeless, but it gets so much into what influences people and how it makes them tick. Both my father and my husband said that it was just beyond price. So, okay, the one thing that you can do in 24 hours, well, it's 1.5. One, download the book. Part 2, read a couple of chapters.
Sure. Crack it. Don't just order it, but you can, assuming you get the digital copy. Otherwise, you have to wait until it gets delivered.
No, get the digital, because I want you to have it right off. It'll change your life. It will make your life better.
All right. You heard it here first. Go download Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I confess that has been on my list forever and a day. I have not ever had a chance to crack it myself, so I'm going to follow.
Yeah, I challenge you.
Myself. I accept. All right. Now let's talk about guiding others on the journey, because we've talked about your journey. Now let's talk about how we bring others up behind us. Things like succession planning and training or grooming high potentials. Tell me, and perhaps these are some lessons that you learned more from Sheraton's or from Perdue's or from other companies. But when hiring or grooming a high potential employee for an executive position, what are the 3 most important communication skills to you?
I'm thinking of something that my father used to say, and it's in 3 parts.
Great.
And it goes right back to the story of when he'd first take over a hotel.
Okay.
And he said there are 3, well, in his world anyway, that there are 3 major ways of getting people to do what you want. And management is the art of getting things done through other people. So we're talking management skills. And, again, if you're going to rise in your career, it's the people who are working for you who are going to make you look good.
Yes.
So it's just all important to figure out what it takes to get them to do what you want. And Father said, in that story that I just mentioned about how he stood up in front of 400 demoralized people, he said, I could have gotten them to do what I want by standing up there and saying, shape up or you're fired. He said that is a bad approach, or at least an ineffective approach, because he said I could have gotten compliance. People would have maybe shaped up more, but that approach is intimidation. And he said that when you intimidate people, they may do what you want, but they're going to do it grudgingly, and maybe they'll try to sabotage it a little bit. Sure. I mean, it's just not a good way of getting what you want. So
then skill number 1 would be looking for somebody who has the ability to influence people through positive means, to get them on board as opposed to forcing them to
yeah.
Okay.
So in his world, approach number 2 to getting your way, he could have stood up in front of them and he could have told them, do a great job, and there's a promotion in line for you, there's bonuses.
The carrot versus the stick.
Yeah, but he said, that's better than intimidation, but it's also not a good approach to getting people long-term to do what you want. He said the problem with bribery is you have to keep upping the ante. Yes. And it's too transactional. People are going to work for the award rather than something bigger.
Okay.
And his view, and certainly my late husband's view, was what really works is the way my father expressed it was inspire, don't require. That's the way of getting them. And so when he was telling the people that he had just met, he could have told them, do a better job making the beds or tending bar or any of the jobs that you do in a hotel, but instead he was inspiring them with the idea that that they were part of a team. They were part of something bigger than themselves. So the maid isn't just making beds. She's part of the team that's making this the most successful hotel in the whole city, the one that's going to inspire everybody that even though times are bad, things can turn around. And so his view of inspire, don't require is, I think, maybe some of the best advice that we could possibly give people. You want them, a leader's job is to give people a better vision of themselves.
Yes.
And so inspire, don't require is part of that.
I like that. I like that little, that's what I call a tweetable and repeatable soundbite. Something that's a great little phrase that rings well, it's easy to remember, and it's easy for people to recite and repeat to others as well, to share it along. That whole idea of inspire, don't require. Great leadership lesson. So then perhaps they can also share some, maybe your father or your late husband had some suggestions with regard to managing up as well. They clearly had gazillions of people working for them at various points. So what's something that was a pet peeve of theirs that they wished people who worked for them, their direct reports, those who had to report up to them directly, what did they wish their reports would do differently?
I can remember when I was getting my master's degree in public administration at George Washington University, I remember a management class, and trust me, this is going to circle back to your question.
Okay.
But at this management class, we were given a case study. And the case study was in a textbook that there was a man who was working for a hotel chain, and he was managing a hotel, and the dilemma that we, the students, were supposed to figure out as a case study what this guy should have done about it. His problem was that the old man, which was the head of the company, was asking him for so many reports and bothering him so much that he couldn't get the job done. And so we, the students, as a project, were supposed to, for a couple of days, figure out, if we were that manager, what should we do about it? Well, I called up my father. And I said, this is the case study. What do you make of it? And he said that for probably 20 different reasons, he could tell that they were talking about him. I mean, it was the nickname, It was the reporting requirements. It was just a complete certainty that I was part of a study group that was to tell what to do about this case. And he said he even remembered the case. Okay. He said, here's the problem. I don't want to be riding herd in somebody. I'd rather be doing something really creative. But on the other hand, if a manager is failing, I've got to guide him, and that means asking him questions and being in his face. And I absolutely don't want to do it. But on the other hand, I don't want to fire him because we put a lot of effort into grooming people and getting to them to that position. And so my father's view of it was that he, the old man, wasn't bothering this person for the sake of bothering him. He was trying to get him on this to do a better job. Well, the students reconvened in the class, and I listened with fascination. I didn't confess to them that I knew this other side of it, but I listened with amazement that every student there was saying, well, you should ignore him. You should ignore the old man. You shouldn't take his calls. You just shouldn't let him get to you. And that meant that in that class, those kids were learning to do the exact thing that probably would get them fired. And so this is a very long way of answering your question, but what do you wish from the people who are your
direct reports?
Your direct reports? I think in every case that I'm familiar with, but I'm certainly willing to acknowledge that there would be other cases. But I think, your boss, unless there's something really funky going on, wants you to succeed. And if your boss is giving you guidance, turn yourself inside out and into a pretzel to try to get it right, as opposed to the advice that was given of ignore him,
Sure, sure. So it sounds like when you're getting guidance from the boss that may seem corrective, to step back a little bit and perhaps listen to the boss's intention and
Yeah,
where it's coming from, and recognize that it's most likely in your best interest.
that's, again, I don't want to make blanket statements, but my experience of life is that. And further, I've worked since age 15, and I always felt that my job as an employee was to figure out what my boss wanted. And actually, the way I phrase it is figure out what you win points for and what you lose points for, and do the things you win points for.
Sure.
And I also felt that, okay, another little piece of personal advice from my own life, but I picked it up just from the people I've been around, which is that one of the greatest wastes of time in life is doing 90% of the job. On the other hand, if you can do 110%, you'll stand out. So don't just get by with your work product. Figure out something extra that you can add to it, something that will please and delight the boss.
Sure. Going above and beyond.
Yeah, because why be average? Why waste your time being average?
Exactly. Nobody ever got ahead by being average, that's for sure. Well, this now takes us to the final part of our interview, and this is the speed round. So I'm going to give you a couple of choices. And for each one, I'm going to ask you just to give a single word or phrase about where you stand. And these are issues that regularly arise in my coaching and training, where people often feel like they struggle because they think it's black or white and it's really not. And they also struggle because they feel like they're the only ones who struggle with these issues. And we want to let them know that, this is something that's pretty common for just about everybody. So I'm going to ask you to do just a short one word or short phrase initial response, and then I'll prompt you for a little bit of extra advice, and then we're going to run through these real quick at the end. So the first one is public speaking. Love it or hate it?
Used to hate it, now love it.
Oh, great. Okay, so then give us one tip for managing nerves and speaking with confidence, and perhaps learning to love it as you have.
The more you prepare, the better off you'll be. I took a year-long speaking course with the National Speakers Association.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they told us is know your material as well as you know the Lord's Prayer. So don't try to wing it. Practice it 40 or 50 times if you need to.
Sure. And if you can do that, terrific, especially. And if nothing else, I love what I call the 60 to 60 rule, which is if you don't have time to practice that much, at least get that first minute. Rehearse that until you've got that to the hilt, so you can at least start smooth. And then most people get into their groove at that point and you can figure out the rest. But yes, prepare. Okay, what about this one? Introvert or extrovert? Where do you fall?
Smack dab in the middle.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so with that balance, what's one of your strengths and what's an area for growth?
Strengths. I think my own analysis of myself is that I'm eager to learn, and I want in every case that I can to learn new skills to increase my talent stack. And areas for growth, I fight against this, but I just don't seem to succeed very well. I'd love to be able to give shorter answers. I know that I monologue too much.
It's hard when you've got a whole life with all these great stories and all these great venues and people in it. I actually think we did really great. So I want to thank you for sharing all the details and sharing all of your experiences and sharing the perspectives and lessons from your father as well as your husband and all the amazing things that you have done yourself in this wonderful life.
Can I add one other thing? This is the reason why I avoid negative thinking.
Sure.
I'm not good at thinking about the things that are not good. And I have a reason for that. I was very influenced by a quote from the great novelist Alexander Dumas. Mm-hmm. And he said, "He who listens to his own doubts is enlisting armies of enemies who are fighting him. So don't do it."
Okay. And finally, conflict management. When you're faced with a potential conflict or a difficult conversation, is your natural instinct to want to avoid it or to want to engage it head on?
Natural instinct to avoid it.
So then what's one piece of advice that you can give others whose reflex is like yours? Because obviously we can't avoid everything all the time.
absolutely don't avoid it. Things usually get worse if you try to sweep them under the rug.
Okay. Now, Mitzi, thank you so much for taking us on this journey with you and coming along our journey with us. How can people learn more about you and win this fight?
I'd love it if they'd come to my website, winthisfight.org. And if they'd like to contact me, there's a contact form.
Mitzi, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank our listeners, as always, for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes so we can help even more people increase their confidence, presence, and influence. And finally, if you want to download my quick start guide to mastering the 3 C's, command the room, connect with the audience, and close the deal, go to speakingtoinfluence.com. I'm Dr. Laura Sicola, and you're listening to Speaking to Influence, Communication Secrets of the C-Suite. Hi everyone, this is Dr. Laura Sicola, and I want to sincerely thank you for listening to the Speaking to Influence podcast. If you love listening to these episodes as much as I love bringing them to you, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and please go to iTunes right now to rate and review our podcast in order to help us expand our reach so even more people can master the 3 C's to command the room, connect with the audience, and close the deal.
Thanks for listening to Speaking to Influence, Communication Secrets of the C-Suite, the show for leaders who want to speak with impact. The hosts, producers, owners, and media distributors of the show make no guarantees that the strategies and information discussed will result in profit or other success and may result in losses. The opinions and statements of the hosts and guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the owners, staff, managers, broadcasters, or sponsors of the show. No medical or psychological therapy or personal or professional wellness or relationship advice is offered in the show. You are advised to seek counsel on matters related to your health, family, relationships, job, or other business and legal matters from licensed advisors in those areas prior to making any changes in business or lifestyle. No information provided may be suitable in your situation. As always, take responsibility for the decisions and actions you take, including the reactions they may make in your work, family, health, and life.